We've all heard of the Bermuda Triangle, but have you heard of the Alaska Triangle? The triangle connects Anchorage and Juneau in the south to Barrow, which is Alaska's coastal region, in the north. There have been many mysterious disappearances. Some have been explained by science and the elements taking the lives of innocent people, while others may have a more sinister explanation. It's believed that there may be other myths, legends, and paranormal activity that are behind these disappearances, from the Kostenko to energy vortexes and even extraterrestrials. Over 16,000 people have gone missing since 1988, most of which have never been found with no trace. While the infamous disappearance of politicians in 1972 put the Alaska Triangle on the map, that was not the start of the Alaska Triangle. What's really going on in Alaska? Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, my name is Monica. I like to post anti-MLM, life, and some true crime content here on this channel. So if any of that interests you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I would love for you to stick around. In today's video, I'm bringing you the 5th installment of my Spooktober true crime series. Yes, it had to spill over into November. I'm so sorry that I was not able to finish this series in the month of October. But anyway, today we're going to be discussing the Alaska Triangle. Before I proceed though, just so you guys know, disclaimer, this video is for entertainment purposes only and just my opinions, along with any of the research that I was able to do online, anything that I was able to watch. I do encourage you to do your own research on this topic as well. This isn't entirely true crime, but it's a little mysterious, a little maybe even eerie to some. I got the idea for this video from watching Blacklist. I think it was probably about 3 months ago now that I watched this one episode and they talked about the Alaska Triangle. I didn't even know that it existed, so I had to look it up, and sure enough, it's a real thing. That's when I started talking to one of my patrons. Shout out to Dee. She resides in Alaska. And she was the one that she messaged me and told me, yes, this is a real thing. That's why I wanted to talk about it, because it's just strange. I saw that the Travel Channel had its own series on it, so I did decide to watch it. There were some things in it that I found a little, didn't really make sense to me. Then I looked it up online. Some of the things were a little different. So of course, just when you watch anything, take it with a grain of salt. But it was super interesting, and it sent me down this rabbit hole for weeks and weeks and weeks. I was supposed to make this video, it was supposed to be my second Spooktober video. So obviously I went down the rabbit hole. This will be a 2-part video because I did not want to overwhelm all of you with a lot of the information. So part 1 is going to go over the paranormal activity, ghost ships, mysterious disappearances, and things of that nature, while part 2 is going to go over myths, legends, aliens, and missing planes. So with all of that being said, let's get into the introduction about what the Alaska Triangle is. I'm sure that we've all heard about the Bermuda Triangle. So some people have called the Alaska Triangle the Bermuda Triangle of the North. Others have even gone as far as to call it the Devil's Triangle because of all of the mysterious disappearances that happen within this triangle. The Alaska Triangle connects Anchorage and Juneau in the south to Barrow, which is Alaska's coastal region in the north. As beautiful as Alaska is, it can also be very dangerous. Scientists have stated it's due to forests, mountains, lakes, and large areas of just open space and nothing in sight. However, then you have others who have stated it could be extraterrestrials or aliens, energy vortexes, and urban legends. The reason why the Alaska Triangle is so scary is because of how many people have gone missing with little to no recovery of these people. Since 1988, more than 16,000 people have disappeared. According to one article, the rate per 1,000 people is more than twice the national average. These over 16,000 people include airplane passengers, hikers, locals, and tourists. The infamous disappearance that got the Alaska Triangle a lot of attention was in 1972. This is when a private airplane was carrying U.S. House Majority Leader Hale Boggs, Alaska Congressman Nick Begich, Russell Brown, and the pilot whose name was Don Johns. that plane disappeared somewhere between Juneau and Anchorage. For the following few months, about 50 civilian airplanes and 40 military airplanes started this search, along with searching by boat, car, and foot for approximately 32,000 square miles. They were never able to find a trace of any victims or the plane. However, the Alaska Triangle was taking lives and having mysterious activity way before 1972. A lot of theories and speculation has been expressed as to why people go missing. There are some people who believe that it could be the Alaskan Bigfoot. The Tlingit people who live in the triangle think it could be the Kostenko. The Kostenko is a shapeshifter who is half man and half otter. The Kostenko has been said to pretend to be women and children crying out for some kind of help. That's when the Kostenko will lure these people to their deaths. We'll go a little bit more in depth with this myth, legend, whatever you want to call it, in part 2 of this series that I'm doing. As I've said earlier, some people believe that there's aliens. They've spotted UFOs, allegedly spotted UFOs, and they believe that this is what is causing these mysterious disappearances. There's even been speculation that there could be some kind of possible underground alien base in Fairbanks, Alaska. Along with this, we do have people, scientists, and other just, I guess you could say, locals and people who are skeptics in a sense, that believe these mysterious disappearances are just due to the elements in the environment of Alaska, along with some of these areas are very desolate and have a lot of animals that inhabit the area as well. Let's move on to the paranormal activity, ghost ships, and some mysterious disappearances. The first one that I'm going to talk about is what I'm going to call the Sarah Jepsen haunting. They talked about this in the travel series, The Alaska Triangle. Unfortunately, I was not able to find too much information about this besides what they said in the Travel Channel series. So take this with a grain of salt, because I wasn't able to find that much information on it. Anyway, let's get into what I'm going to call the Sarah Jepsen haunting. This haunting was that of her cabin that was located in a town called Sterling in southern Alaska. According to Tony Hernandez, who is a paranormal investigator, he believes that the Alaska Triangle is a hot spot for spirits. There are a lot of native burial grounds in this triangle, which if disrupted or if someone disrespects the land, there can be repercussions. Sarah had moved to this cabin in the woods in 1999 with her 2 daughters. In the series, Montana is the name of one of her daughters. She did speak about the haunting because she remembered parts of it. She was 5 years old at the time. It started off with little things here and there, nothing too worrisome. The cabin was infested with carpenter ants. Sarah described that sometimes it got so bad that she would feel them fall on her face while she was laying in bed because they would fall from the ceiling. In addition to that, the lights would flicker a lot, but in my opinion, if you think about it, she's living in a cabin, isolated, in the woods. So if it were me, I would think, oh, this is just normal. We're not near civilization. This is just what's going to happen living out in the middle of nowhere in the woods. But then her answering machine would start going off randomly. So Sarah decided she was going to explore the area a little bit. Of course, they had some abandoned vehicles that were on the property because this was an older cabin. They lived in the middle of nowhere. It was very isolated. But she started to notice that there were these holes in the ground. It was almost as if these could be possible graves. All of a sudden, this weird activity started to progress. Sarah started having these dreams of her digging something up on the property. Following these dreams, she would hear a woman's voice almost calling out to her. Of course, this is a little creepy. It would probably freak out most people. It would probably freak me out, I'm not gonna lie. But then one day, things got even creepier. She took a photo of her daughters that were just playing outside. In that photo, she says that she saw a woman while her daughter Montana would go on to tell her mom that it looked like the woman had a hole in her head. Now, when they showed this photo in the Travel Channel series, I was a little skeptical. I didn't really see this figure that they were talking about in the photo. And I'm not saying that Sarah's fabricating any of this or that this isn't real, because I very openly talked about how I do believe in the paranormal in my last 2 Spooktober videos. But when I saw the photo, I didn't see the woman that they were talking about. I did see the spot where they said that it looked like a hole in the head, because it did look like a hole in something, but I didn't see the figure of a woman. But I may be wrong. Maybe I wasn't looking at it right, and maybe it's just my opinion. Anyway, after Sarah saw this photo along with other strange occurrences, she ripped up the floorboard and just started digging. So it was in her cabin. She just ripped up the floorboard and just started digging through, because I guess it was just the floor and dirt underneath it. So it was a legitimate cabin. Directly under her cabin is where she started to find, at first it was normal items in the dirt, but then she found what looked like finger bone fragments, hair, and a fake flower bouquet. Of course, this is when Sarah started thinking maybe, just maybe, there could be a body of a murdered woman underneath her cabin that is causing all of this chaos that's happening and all of this paranormal activity. So that's when she decided to just start looking at the property, looking to see if maybe she could find some more information. That's when she went through the abandoned cars. In one of the cars, she found what seemed to be kind of like a journal or a diary of a man who, I think it's safe to assume, lived in the cabin at one point. The last entry of this diary or journal was about his mistress and how she wanted to leave him. Apparently, this made him so angry that the last entry said that if he can't have her, nobody can have her. This left the question of, did he murder his mistress and then bury her body underneath the cabin? Is that the hair that Sarah found, the finger bone fragments, the fake flower bouquet? Was that a fake flower bouquet that you would use during a funeral? That kind of a thing. So after Sarah found all of these items, things took a turn for the worse. She said in the series that one night she saw her 75-pound glass table levitate 5 feet into the air, and then it came crashing down. This was the moment where Sarah felt it was safer for her to take her children to her mother's house. What Sarah didn't know would end up happening is this dark entity that she had an issue with at her cabin would follow her to her mother's house. She said that allegedly, while the spirit didn't bother the children, while she was sleeping, she saw a black mist that was seeping through the doorway. And after she saw this black mist, it was almost as if something was trying to pull her off of the bed by her ankles. Jeff Richards, who is an intuitive and a paranormal investigator, made an appearance on the Travel Channel series as well. He decided to look into Sarah's case. At the time of the series being aired, Jeff said that he had only been physically attacked by a spirit twice in his years of investigating, and that is not a common occurrence, meaning that the spirit was incredibly dangerous and malevolent. Remember Tony Hernandez from a little bit earlier? He's a paranormal investigator. Well, him and his partner, her name is Neely Lithgow, they wanted to help Sarah. They heard about her case and they felt that they needed to help her because they were worried. Tony and Neely picked up some readings of some kind of activity in the home. They recorded it to see if they could get any kind of audio, which later they would find out whatever this entity was said things like, "I want you, I'll get you in time, Tony." So I guess at one point this spirit or entity was talking directly to Tony. During this same investigation, Neely looked down the hallway and she saw that the beads on the bead curtain, remember those bead curtains? Well, they probably still exist to this day, but they were really big back in the day. She said that she saw the beads just moving on their own, and there was a ball of light that just emerged out of nowhere. Neely walked up to see, she wanted to measure the temperature of this ball of light. but all of a sudden it just disappeared. But they had a photo of it, and in this photo, they showed it in the series, in this photo it clearly looks like a man of some sort, an apparition of, it was an apparition, but it was a man. You could clearly see that there was a man in this photo. After this happened though, the light just completely, it just went out the window. That's when Tony and Neely decided that they were going to leave. This case really scared them, and they said that it scared them it scared them the most out of all of their cases. After reviewing all of the footage a little bit later on, one of the EVPs said, quote, "one more bouquet," end quote. So as I said earlier, usually they use bouquets or flowers and stuff like that for funerals. So was this spirit or entity trying to say that there is a body buried under the cabin, as Sarah was speculating throughout all of this time? Jeff Richards, who is the paranormal investigator and the intuitive that I spoke about just a little bit earlier, he listened to the recordings from Tony and Neely. He believes that instead of this entity saying, "I want you," that it's saying, "I want you dead." A little later down the line, Sarah invited one of her friends to come stay at her cabin because him and his girlfriend had just broken up. So, of course, get away from everything that's going on, have a little bit of time to yourself in this isolated middle of nowhere cabin. But Sarah said that he started to become a different person, almost as if he was possessed by some kind of mean, angry type of a spirit. A little while after her friend had visited her, she would come home to find the cabin up in flames. All of their belongings were completely gone and destroyed. So that's when Sarah decided that she was going to take her children. They left Alaska altogether. She went back many years later, and while they were shooting the episode for the travel series, or the Travel Channel series, Tony and Neely came back to the property. The house is still burnt to pieces there. It's the way that she left it. Tony was trying to speak with this spirit and looking for electromagnetic fields, and there was a spike that he saw where Sarah had found the items underneath the cabin. Tony wanted to start digging to see what they could find, and Neely was recording everything. So Sarah is the one she ended up digging in this area. She found what looked to be a tarp, and all of a sudden it started to smell really bad. But unfortunately, the deeper that she got, the soil was still frozen, so she couldn't keep digging. Tony found a newspaper clipping in the trunk of one of the cars. Now, this is what was kind of weird to me because it was just way too coincidental, and I think it might have been for dramatic effect for the show, but that's just my opinion. That had the date May 7th of 1978, which was odd because Sarah was born on May 7th. The only difference is that she was born in 1976, which was 2 years earlier. Unfortunately, the show didn't follow up on what was in that tarp, and I couldn't find anything online. So maybe one day we will find out if it was an actual person or an animal, or if it was just for dramatic effect for the show. There were a lot of things that were told in this story that when you watch the series, for example, the picture of the alleged woman, I didn't see her in the picture. I did see the man in the other picture when Tony and Neely were there. But the newspaper clipping, it was just, maybe it's also the way that they edited it, but it just seemed too convenient and too coincidental the way that they found it. But that's just my opinion. Again, I'm not saying that Sarah fabricated all of this, because there is a lot of stuff that happened within the story that is just, if she were making that up, then she has a really great imagination. But the next paranormal activity story, I guess you can call it, is about the Alaska Hotel. Hey guys, Editing Monica here. I kept saying the Alaska Hotel in this portion of the video, but it's actually the Alaskan Hotel. So please keep in mind that that is the name of the hotel. I'm so sorry that I mispronounced it for this portion of the video. The Alaska Hotel is said to be one of the most haunted buildings in Alaska. In 1880, there was a local chief, and he told Joe Juneau and Richard Harris that there was gold in what is now known to be Gold Creek in Silverboat Basin. The city of Juneau was founded that year. Because of the findings of gold, this sparked the Juneau Gold Rush, and eventually in that time, they would have one of the largest gold mines in the entire world. Juneau would obviously be known to be a mining town. Fast forward to 1913, where the Alaska Hotel was, and people would come there whether to stay for a while because they were either working at the mine or they were part of the gold rush, or they would go there for a little bit of fun with the women, if you catch my drift. The hotel would attract miners, fishermen, and political figures. In the Travel Channel series, they interviewed the owner, the current owner right now, and his name is Josh. Josh took Jeff Richards, the intuitive that I talked about earlier, for a tour of the hotel. While they were interviewing Josh, he talked about how he believed that there was a poltergeist in the basement who he believes shows a lot of hatred and anger towards women specifically. This poltergeist started happening after there was an accident in the basement. Josh had found a man by the name of Charles who was 44, and he died in the hot tub by drowning. During Jeff's investigation of this alleged poltergeist that was in the basement of the Alaska Hotel, he believes that there's more than just Charles. There's another older spirit that is causing havoc in the basement. They did find out that this hotel was built on sacred ground. They say that room 315 is the most haunted room. This room isn't exactly up to date with modern times. There are 2 single beds they have floral linens on them. There is an antique phone that hangs from the wall, along with 2 paintings of women from the early 20th century. They believe that these 2 women are working girls from back in the day. And they believe that a woman named Alice is behind this haunting of room 315. The story of Alice and room 315 is, I think, where the lines get a little blurred, because the story about Alice, it says, in the summer of 1917, Alice looked back over her shoulder to her sister, who was crying, begging her not to leave her beautiful San Francisco life, with one hand clutched to her suitcase filled with her most prized possessions, 2 dresses, a pair of shoes, and a framed photo of her mother. The other arm locked tightly in her new husband's embrace. They had been married just 1 month when he announced they'd be moving their life to Alaska in search of gold in the world's last and greatest frontier. Then it says, 3 long weeks had passed before finally tying up to the docks in the world's current gold capital. Muddy roads, tattered boardwalks lining the streets, totem poles towering over various corners. The 2 set camp in the tent city above the docks and at the foothills of Gold Creek. Alice, doing her best to make her new camp a home, within 2 days of her husband had packed up his gold pan, gear, and enough provisions for a 2-week prospecting trip up into the Perseverance Valley. But when 2 weeks turned into 6, Alice knew she was on her own. Word on the streets suggested the shape-shifting Kostenko had been known to lead men astray deep into the woods, never to return. Pitying looks began following her wherever she went. Alice lifted the floorboard to her last bit of savings and crumbled to the floor, looking up to the tent ceiling in despair. It was time she went to work in search of her own gold. But Alice was smart. Alice knew how to make the gold come to her. Becoming a lady of the night was thrilling. For the first time, she was free, independent, and a real force. One night of servicing the hungry men at the bar paid for 2 weeks of fine living. After just 1 night of working, she was able to move into her own hotel room. The way she saw it, a few months of this would have her permanently living at the finest hotel, dressed in elaborate gowns, gold nuggets dripping from her neck, rings adorned in raw jade. Yes, Alice was smart. Alice would overcome and be richer than any of those who doubted her, pitied her, laughed at her. Then it says that she took her most loyal customer upstairs to her new room, number 218. That's when the door was kicked open by her husband, and this would be the fateful night where Alice would be murdered by her husband. This is where it says, since that dreadful October night in 1917, there have been several reports and sightings of Alice in her white gown of pools of blood seeping from under the door of room 218. However, there is another article that says, today the staff and guests have reported interactions with Alice's ghost on many occasions, close to where she met her gruesome demise. She lingers in the back of the hotel, especially in rooms 218, 318, and 219. As a result, many guests desire to be moved to a different room or simply leave the hotel entirely due to an undesirable run-in with one of the Alaskan hotel's invisible guests. So this is where I would like to say I think this is another one of those ghost stories that has probably been passed down. It's been changed a little bit, so I'm not sure how accurate all of this is. On May 19th of 2007, the USS Bunker Hill, which was a missile cruiser, was at the port in Juneau and scheduled to leave the following day. One of the sailors emailed the hotel saying he wanted to stay in the haunted room of the hotel. That night, the Juneau police were called and an officer by the name of Chris Gifford came to the hotel due to a disturbance in room 315. There was a lot of shouting coming from this room, but the door was locked and they couldn't get in. Some guests thought something had happened in the room. Others thought it was just shouting coming from the bar. That's when one of the guests told Officer Gifford that they think a man may have jumped out of room 315, out of the window, because they heard some really loud, crazy noise along with glass shattering. Gifford finally got into the hotel room to find blood all over the room, as if something truly horrific happened in that room. They did find the man who jumped out of the window, and thankfully he survived jumping out of this window. He had injuries from head to toe, but he was able to walk out to the street and ask for help. This man was medevaced out of Juneau and survived all of his injuries. Thankfully, he survived all of his injuries. There are employees who report paranormal activity and leave almost immediately after being hired for the hotel, but then there are those who have worked there for years and don't believe any of it because they'd never seen any kind of paranormal activity in the hotel. Bjorn Dilly has written a lot about the Alaska Hotel. In 2017, he even wrote Haunted Inside Passage. In an interview, he said the following, quote, "You know, when you think about it, history is a ghost story, and the more you think about history, the more haunting it becomes. If you think hard enough about something, especially if you're confined in a dirty little room, thinking about it after having a few drinks, you might think you see something. Our minds are so fickle and weak and vast at the same time." End quote. In the Travel Channel series, Jeff Richards had a recorder where he was trying to pick up electromagnetic waves. The recorder said the words basement, July, hell, Alice, and poltergeist. According to Jeff, he theorizes that Alice is still wandering the hotel and scaring people. Let me know what you guys think about that ghost story. Now we're going to move on to the Alaskan Titanic. The Alaskan Titanic, also known as the Princess Sophia, was a passenger and cargo steamer that would go from Vancouver to Skagway, Alaska. On October 23rd of 1918, they had over 350 reported people and stowaways, 24 horses, and 1 dog on board. Princess Sophia was going down the Lynn Canal, which is the deepest canal, along with being extremely long. This canal is also known for very unpredictable weather. When they set out in 1918, they experienced a really bad storm that had up to 80-mile-per-hour winds, but they really weren't concerned about it because the boat was designed to withstand this kind of weather. There was a reef called Vanderbilt Reef in this canal. Somehow the ship got stuck on this reef due to it being low tide. However, what's strange is the reef was completely off course by about a mile. The captain decided that they would wait for high tide because they could just float right off the reef once it was high tide. This wait turned into over 40 hours and the storm was only getting worse. While the ship was stuck, it should have been safe and just hanging out on this reef, no problems. But then mysteriously, the steel hole tore open and the boiler exploded, causing oil to go everywhere. On October 25th of 1918, there were a lot of Mayday calls, one of which was an SOS message that said, quote, "Taking water and foundering, for God's sake, come and save us," end quote. The SS Princess Sophia started to sink. Some people tried to use their life jackets and get off the ship, while others just accepted their fate. Over 350 people died, along with all hands, and only the one dog that was on the ship survived. And that dog had washed ashore along with approximately 100 dead bodies. Up to 200 bodies were unaccounted for. A lot of people blame the sinking of the Princess Sophia on the captain because the boat was built for that kind of weather. Some have said that because of the magnetic anomalies in that area, this can have an effect on compasses and even the human mind. These magnetic fields could have caused the captain and his team to become disoriented. Some have even said that they believe this could have happened due to people taking gold, for example, off of sacred land. A lot of shipwrecks have happened in that area, especially the ones that are carrying gold. It's been said that because of the amount of bodies that washed ashore, they could not fit into the morgue because the morgue had a max capacity of 10. They had to bring some of these bodies to the Juneau drugstore. There have been people that have said there's paranormal activity because of this and have seen things such as apparitions and stuff like that in the Juneau drugstore. As I said, there were bodies that were unaccounted for. They never found those bodies. They never really truly figured out what happened because divers have gone down to the Princess Sophia and said that the boilers are intact, so there's no way that the boilers could have exploded, but this is all allegedly. So of course, we're just not 100% sure of what happened with the Princess Sophia. Now we're going to move on to ghost ships, two in particular that I wanted to cover in this video. The first one is the SS Beichamau. The SS Beichamau was 1,322-ton cargo steamer that was built in Sweden in 1914. It was owned by Hudson's Bay Company and was used to trade provisions for pelts with the Inuit people along the Victoria Island coast and Northwest Territories of Canada. On October 1st of 1931, the Beichamau became trapped in ice. The Beichamau was loaded with a cargo of fur, very expensive fur. The crew decided that they would leave the ship and travel for about half a mile on the ice to the town of Barrow to stay there for 2 days, but somehow the ship had broken free from the ice by the time that they returned. Unfortunately for the crew, the ship was stuck yet again on October 8th. That's when, on October 15th, the Hudson's Bay Company sent a plane to pick up 22 people from the crew. However, 15 people did stay behind with the ship, and that's in addition to the 22 people. That's when these 15 men decided that they would try to wait it out, even if they had to wait out the entire winter. They made themselves a shelter, but then on November 24th, there was a really bad blizzard, and when they went back to the ship, it had vanished. The captain thought that maybe during the storm, the Beichamau was broken up and sunk. Just a few days later, though, an Inuit hunter saw the Beichamau, which was odd because the captain didn't think that the ship could have survived the blizzard. It was a really bad blizzard. The crew members were able to track down the ship, and they thought there was no way the Beichamau would survive the rest of the weather and the rest of its time on the water. So they somehow got on the ship and took the fur that they had and they transported it via airplanes. Once they were able to get the fur off of the Beichamau, that's when they abandoned it for good. The SS Beichamau didn't sink. The ship would drift around and people would see the ship randomly. The last recorded sighting of the Beichamau was in 1969, 38 years after the ship was abandoned. There is a story that at one point a man somehow boarded the ship, but when planes were flying above it, they couldn't see anything. They couldn't see the ship, they couldn't see this man, nothing. However, this could be made up and just a way to keep this ghost ship story alive. In the end, no one knows where the SS Baychimo is now. It could have sank or it could just be floating somewhere. No one knows. The next ghost ship I wanted to talk about is the Octavius. Legend has it that the Octavius left England in 1761 and arrived at its destination the following year. The captain wanted to attempt a different route because it's one that no one had traveled before, and it was through the Northwest Passage. It's said that the ship was trapped in ice somewhere in northern Alaska. The crew was not on the ship. This is where it kind of gets a little weird with the history because it didn't give me enough information, but it said that the crew wasn't on the ship when it was found, but that they found the captain along with his wife and his son frozen beneath deck. So I'm not 100% sure who found it or anything like that, but it was in the 1770s that the ship was found drifting. Even though the ship has disappeared in Alaska, it was said that it was discovered somewhere near Greenland. According to legends, some believe that these two ships were cursed from taking things from sacred land. That's really all that I have for ghost ships, and there is one more thing I wanted to discuss in this video because it was something that one of my patrons, Dee, the one that resides in Alaska, she sent me this series of videos on YouTube, and I started looking into it, and it's of a man who there's just been this mysterious disappearance, and that is of Vladimir Kostenko. I'll leave links below for the YouTube videos that Dee, one of my patrons, had sent me, along with articles about this man, Vladimir, who went missing. His friend is looking for him, and he talks about how Vladimir wanted to go out and live in the wilderness on his own. From the sounds of it, it seems like one of those soul searching kind of things, which we will go over a little bit later because there is an article that I found about that. This is not the only missing person, and I will leave a link to the active missing persons bulletins in Alaska in case anyone has any information about any of the people that are on that bulletin, because there are a lot of people who have gone missing. Vladimir Kostenko resided in Anchorage, Alaska, and in August of 2018, he walked 14 miles into a desolate area in the valley on the western side of Hatcher Pass. He didn't really have too much with him besides a backpack and 5 pounds of oatmeal. Vladimir didn't have anything that could protect him from any of the animals that are out there either. He didn't plan on staying in the cabin for too long. At 42 years old, Vladimir, who was an immigrant from Russia, decided to live almost like a monk lifestyle, I guess you could say, which included fasting, meditating, and reading a lot. I'll leave his entire story linked below. There's an article, a really great article that I found that if you want, you can read it. But short version, he was described to be a bit of a loner. His sister Alla said that his family was wondering if he would ever settle down to have a family of his own. And when she had asked Vladimir about this, he said, quote, "I'd absolutely love to do that, but if I have not figured out what I'm here for and what this is all about, I cannot bring another person into this," end quote. Which, in my opinion, I actually like his train of thought on this. I think that that's a really great response to something like that. But according to his sister, Vladimir wanted to contribute to this world. He wanted to do whatever he could for this world. Then he found out that someone he knew, a family member, his name was Dmitry Kudrin, had some work in Alaska that he needed help with. Vladimir knew Dmitry had a cabin in this desolate area in the woods in Alaska that he asked if he could live in. Dmitry was all for allowing Vladimir to stay in this cabin, but he was a little worried about how Vladimir didn't want to bring more than his backpack and his 5 pounds of oatmeal, even though Dmitry knew the cabin had been fully stocked with a ton of canned goods. He was just worried for his friend because the area it can be a dangerous area, along with the lack of knowledge that Vladimir, he just didn't have this knowledge about this terrain, this new area that he's going to be living in. Well, Vladimir set off for his new life where he wanted to experience just being in this wilderness on his own, all of that kind of stuff. He did bring his iPhone, so he wasn't 100% disconnected from the world, but he did bring his iPhone and an external battery, which had a solar recharging option on it. He would text Dimitri in the beginning talking about the things that he had done that day, certain hikes that he did, certain things that he said that he was able to see while he was out there. But once October and November rolled around, there were very little to no text messages coming from Vladimir. On November 3rd, Dimitri and his brother decided to fly out to the cabin just to check up on Vladimir. When they flew over, they saw Vladimir. He had come out on the porch and he was it looked like he was like waving or something to them. So they delivered some food to him and they went on their merry way because, okay, he's fine. He's okay. Dimitri would travel to Asia for business, and when he got back, there was an earthquake that happened in south central Alaska, but he didn't hear from Vladimir on how he was doing or if anything happened during this earthquake. But on December 23rd, Dimitri and his brother decided to fly out yet again because the winters in Alaska are very harsh, along with only having 6 hours of daylight. They didn't see any smoke coming from the wood stove to signal that someone was still in the cabin and someone was staying warm. Along with that, they didn't see anything on the porch. And while there were tracks around the house in the snow, they couldn't tell if it was a human or an animal. Dimitri would deliver even more food to Vladimir, and then on December 26th, Dimitri went back to the cabin. However, this time they landed and took a look to see if anyone was inside of the cabin. There was no sign of Vladimir. It looked as though it was boarded up, and they took all that off. They went inside. There was no sign of anyone being there. Dimitri would go back to the cabin with Alaska State Troopers. Eventually, the Alaska State Troopers would tell the Kostenko family they saw flight records showing that someone by the name of Vladimir Kostenko flew to Hawaii on December 17th. But they would later find out that this was, I think it said over 6 months later, they found out that there was some kind of miscommunication and that Vladimir never flew out of Alaska. To this day, they still have not found Vladimir, which I think is so sad because you find out that there's these alleged records that he flew to Hawaii. So in your mind, you're thinking, okay, this is good. He's still alive. It's just now we're pissed off because he didn't tell us that he was going. Then to find out that it wasn't him at all. So now you're thinking, okay, he's still missing. Where is he? Where is my brother? Where is my son? Where is my friend? But they still haven't been able to find Vladimir. They have done searches and all of that, but still nothing. And this is not an isolated incident. This happens to people all the time in Alaska. And like I said, I'll leave the missing persons bulletin. I'll leave that link below in case you have any information. Maybe someone watching this has seen someone or knows something. So if you want to take a look at that, and if you see someone that you recognize, maybe you have some information. But that is going to be the end of part 1 of this series because there is a lot, and I don't want, like I said in the beginning of this video, I don't want to overwhelm you. Part 2 is going to go over myths, legends, UFOs, aliens, and missing airplanes. I don't know when part 2 is going to come out. I'm not sure if I want to have it come out right after this or if I'm going to have an anti-MLM video first and then part 2. Not 100% sure yet, but if you're watching this and if part 2 is already up on my channel, I'll leave part 2 linked in the description box below. And let me know what your guys' thoughts are so far regarding the Alaska Triangle. There's a lot of disappearances and a lot of just crazy activity that and there's just so many missing people with no trace of them whatsoever. So y'all let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. This is Monica reporting to you live from a highway. Bye.